which is the heat part, and the other part is dynamics. Now, after the yesterday's discussion, I think things are a little bit clear that see any engineering device like a steam engine or a kind of IC engine or turbines, heat pumps, air conditioners, computers, we are basically first dealing with the energy, which we often term as work in terms of the engineering aspects. And then while we do work, we generate heat, a part of the heat that can be utilized, a part of the heat that cannot be utilized, and whatever part of heat cannot be utilized, that is essentially the measure of loss. And if we minimize that loss, then our engineering processes are more efficient. And that's what you are studying in the subjects called thermodynamics and heat transfer. So if you really want to start the subject, you need to know what 5 postulates and 4 laws. So what are the 4 laws? Zeroth law, first law, second law, and third law. What are these? Zeroth law tells that if A and B are 2 systems that are in equilibrium, B and C again, they are in thermal equilibrium, then A and C will be in thermal equilibrium, right? This is called the zeroth law. What is the first law of thermodynamics? For a closed system, the internal energy is equal to, the change of internal energy is equal to the change in the heat content and the work done. Now you can clearly see that internal energy has 2 parts. One is related to heat, which is of low quality energy, and the other is work done, that is the high quality energy. So this is basically the energy balance. What is the second law of thermodynamics? It says that entropy change of any system and its surroundings considered together resulting from any real process is positive. And this entropy change has a big correlation with what? This entropy change has a big correlation with the heat content of the system, correct? So the second law of thermodynamics tells that there will be always a direction to an engineering process. If you really want to reverse the direction, you have to really expend additional work. And what is the third law of thermodynamics? Third law of thermodynamics tells you how to calculate the entropy. So these are the 4 laws. What is the postulate 1? Postulate 1 is the definition of internal energy. What is the postulate 2? Postulate 2 itself is the first law of thermodynamics. What is postulate 3? How do you define entropy? What is postulate 4? So postulate 4 is essentially the second law of thermodynamics. The most important postulate is postulate 5, where you define any thermodynamic property as a function of what? As a function of thermodynamic variables. That we'll see. How do you define that? So, as I said in the last class, that this is one very important slide to remember in your whole life, because this is going to give you a lot of mileage in terms of your understanding. If you really clearly explain to somebody this sort of things, which is not very simple. But in simple terms, if you really understand all the parameters, and then from there, if you make your explanations to the point, then there is a lot of chance that you can really get some common questions during your interviews. Now, if I really translate the entire slide into equations, in the previous slide into equations, so this is what is the map of 0th, first, second, and third. First, we need to know what is heat. Heat is perhaps the lowest quality energy that is available with us. Of course, we make use of heat in order to really do some more work, but then that is perhaps the lowest possible form of energy that is available with us. And work is the major objective of any engineering process. How do we really generate work? And internal energy is what? Internal energy for a closed system is nothing but a combination of these 2. Whereas enthalpy is the energy for an open system, where in addition to internal energy, what we do, something is coming out and something is going out, that also we map, and that's the way we define the enthalpy of an open system. So enthalpy is an energy for an open system. Internal energy is an energy for a closed system or an isolated system, right? And then, if you really add this, mass in, mass out part, so that gives you the total enthalpy. So at this level, you essentially know what is the total energy budget that you have. Whereas when you do get into an engineering process, you already know, because of the heat content of the system, some amount of energy is not available with you. So for that, first you define a parameter called entropy, okay, which is related to this heat content. And then you say that if for a closed system, U is the total amount of energy that is available to me. So TS is the amount of energy that is not available to me. This we call as a Helmholtz free energy. And then we say that for an open system, if H is the total energy budget available to me, TS is the energy that is not available to me. So that's why this is called free energy. These are called free energy. That means this amount of energy is available for you to do any engineering design or drawing. So you have to get hold of these numbers before really. So you may see that you have 100 rupees in your money bag, but then you may not be able to spend more than 80 because you have to travel, you have to go somewhere and come back, you have to save your bus fare. So this entropy is something like that. That actually tells you what is the amount of energy that is not available for your engineering design or engineering process. Now you understand that. So TS becomes a very, very important parameter for us, that how exactly I minimize TS and how exactly I maximize H. That is actually the game of highly efficient engineering devices. So I need to calculate S. So how do I calculate S? S I calculate from 0 Kelvin. Okay. And then I make use of the correlation between Q to the specific heat. I just keep adding all the necessary parameters from 0 to freezing point to point of vaporization, then enthalpy of latent heat of vaporization, latent heat of freezing or melting, latent heat of vaporization, and then beyond that. So this is the way you calculate entropy. For every material you have the CP values, and for every material you have got the enthalpy of melting and vaporization. So this is the way you can do a bottom-up calculation of entropy, right? So from last two slides, you can really see how am I slowly going towards first energy budget, then the calculation of heat, and then calculation of loss. And from there, we'll now try to correlate with different thermodynamic parameters, right? Do you have any question up to this point? Because this is very, very important. Whatever we are going to do after this, this particular slides, rather last two slides, will have a huge impact on your understanding. You have any question here, please? Anybody has any question?
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
So in the 10+2 levels, we used to define feasibility of a reaction by delta S, that is change in entropy. If it is positive, then the reaction was supposed to be feasible. But now we know that ds equal to dq reversible by t is a measure of actually loss of energy. So how can loss of energy be a definition for feasibility of something?
There is no contradiction here. Say, suppose you are burning a matchstick, right? Very good question. This is where I just felt that actually it has hit the bullseye because you have asked the question. See, you have to differentiate between the spontaneity or feasibility of the process with the efficiency of the process. These two are different entities altogether. Okay. What is the efficiency of the process? How much energy I have and how much energy I could utilize. Correct? So total amount of energy that is in the denominator and in the numerator is how much energy I could utilize. This is what is my efficiency of the process. Suppose I have 100 rupees, I could utilize 80. So my efficiency of the process is 80, right?
Yes.
This has no correlation with the spontaneity or feasibility of the process. You can have a highly inefficient process, right? But they can be spontaneous. Say suppose you take a matchstick, right? You have friction with the matchbox, and then you generate, say, fire. So this particular process is a huge entropy generation process. You are basically going for a perfect order with your matchstick that is at the top, and then this friction. These are all in order, right? Now you are brushing it, and suddenly you are exploding the reaction. So you can see huge amount of entropy generation, right? So if I really look at an open system, so now let me look at the parameter here in the open system. So what happened? My ACE is very high, correct? my S is very high, and then G becomes negative, right? Delta G becomes negative, right? If I really write in terms of delta G equal to delta H plus delta Ts, so you will find that since this is a very, very disorder, I'm going from a perfectly ordered state to a perfectly disordered state. So entropy change will be very high. So the process will be very, very spontaneous. My argument is, it is spontaneous feasible, but it is not necessarily an efficient process. Is it clear?
Sir, yes.
Is it clear? So efficiency has to, so you don't use matchstick burning for your thermal power plant. That's the reason why you are not doing it for thermal power plant. That's the reason why you are not using that matchstick to boil water and then use that water for your power generation. I had shown you how many times you do recharging, recycling in the power plant in order to make sure that the process is efficient, right? Could I get the point clear? So yes, feasibility, spontaneity of the process. Suppose I am taking a gasoline and then I am turning on my car. It's a spontaneous process. The car is starting, but it need not be 100% efficient process. It might be when you are starting the car, your car is in the most inefficient state. When you are running it at 40 kilometers per hour, that 40 to 45 is the typical, in fifth gear or fourth gear, you typically get into the highest efficiency domain. Right? So efficiency has nothing to do with the feasibility or spontaneity of the process. These two are two separate things. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Very good question. Yes. Now, so, now more or less we have understood the parameters, what is heat, work, internal energy, enthalpy, entropy, gives free energy, Helmholtz free energy. Now we need to know how do we really calculate them, right? How do I get functions? How do I get mathematically, how do I interpret? So you say variable, you say parameter, I tell this as degrees of freedom. See, this particular word is a more academic word. What is a degree? What do you mean by degree of freedom? Degree of freedom means, say suppose if you can define something with a single parameter, so you have very less degrees of freedom. But if you can define a parameter with, say, suppose 20 variables, so you have more degrees of freedom, right? So you know what is a dependent variable and independent variable, right? Can anybody tell me what is a dependent variable and what is an independent variable? Quickly, don't waste time. We are going into a very interesting domain. Can anybody tell me what is an independent variable and what is a dependent variable? Yes, I'm waiting for you. Nobody knows what is a dependent variable and independent variable. Say suppose you have say H, okay? So suppose you have H, okay, which is a function of, say suppose H, say X. I'm getting accustomed to this particular feature. So let me just do it today by this here only. This mouse only. Say suppose H is a function of what? X, Y, and Z. Okay. So can you tell me what is a dependent variable and what is an independent variable?
X, Y, Z are independent and H is dependent variable.
Correct. So H is a variable which I want to define, and X, Y, Z are my what? Independent variables, and I can call these as what? I can call these as also the degrees of freedom. Okay. Am I correct? Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Sir, also
Yes.
say that whatever happens in one, like if we said X, Y, Z, if we take them as three planes. So if we say something that happens in the X-axis does not affect what happens in the Y-axis, and does not affect that happens in the Z-axis. So this is also an example of independent variable. So like this can also be termed as like degrees of freedom, right?
What you are talking about, it is frame invariance, right? That is a different matter altogether, right? You see, when I say X, Y, Z, I should have been a little bit more specific here. I exactly don't mean X, Y, Z. I also mean, like, say, suppose H, it is a function of pressure. It is a function of volume. It is a function of temperature, right?
Yes.
Okay. I also mean this way. Essentially, I want to mean this way, that T, then N1, okay, then N2, okay, then N3, and then dot as many components as possible present there. So this is my generic expression. This is when I'm talking about, it is with respect to a coordinate system, correct? Whereas this here P can be a function of X, Y, Z, N1, N2, N3 can be a function of X, Y, Z. So this can also be dependent variable, right? But these are degrees of freedom. Here in this equation, these three are degrees of freedom. Here in this situation, these are degrees of freedom. Of course, P can also be a function of what? P can also be a function of X, Y, Z, where X, Y, Z are independent variables. Independent variables.
So like even both P and V are functions of X, Y, Z. Still, both are like degrees of freedom. Like
degrees of freedom. This is the only difference that you have to understand here. That's the reason why the slide is placed here, right? Coordinate system is your decision. How you are doing the mathematical formulation. I may choose R theta Z, R theta phi. I may choose anything else based on my convenience. You say that, okay, you want to do by X, Y, Z, right? So,
yes, sir.
At the end of the day, it is not degrees of freedom means, those variables you are focusing upon where which are property. The property is independent. A characteristic system in equilibrium is called property. The property is independent of the path, and pressure, temperature, volume, mass. These are the variables. So these may be having some dependence on certain independent variables, but these can also be the degrees of freedom. Right? So any thermodynamic property, right? You can really express in terms of what? Any thermodynamic property, just I have expressed H. You can say this is true for anything. Like what? This is true for U. This is true for H. This is true for S. This is true for A. Okay, this is true for G. Any thermodynamic property, you can write like this, and that is the starting point of most generic formulation. I mean, of course, this is the first level of variation, and then you enforce a coordinate system. Why you enforce a coordinate system? Because you are given engineering processes are geometry specific processes. Suppose you have a car, suppose you have an aircraft, suppose you have a microreactor or heat exchanger, right? So in this process, all these are different. Fundamentally they are not different. At this level, it is not different. Where is the difference? Difference is in the geometry. So I need to really elucidate the entire matter to this level to bring in the geometrical aspects. If they are not there, I'm very happy and comfortable at this level. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now when I am comfortable with degrees of freedom, then I go to, so degrees of freedom has a very, very big correlation with the fifth postulate. So I can really define any thermodynamic property in terms of pressure, temperature, volume, mass, and the mole fraction. Just the way I have written. Mass is, of course, has a correlation with the mole fraction that you will work out in thermodynamics class. But then, these are the degrees of freedom that generally we operate, which can be dependent variables whenever you have a geometry where you need independent variables to really complete the mathematical formulation. Great. Now, when I really try to look at heat, what are the different types of heat? There are two types, all of you know, that is called latent heat and sensible heat. So, say, suppose I ask you a very simple question. As an engineer, say, suppose you are given the option to use the sensible heat and latent heat. Which one will you use for heat transfer? If I ask you a very blunt and basic question, that suppose you are given the choice to make use of the sensible heat and then make use of the latent heat. Which one do you use and why?
So latent.
Latent heat.
Why? Your answer is correct, by the way.
Sir, in any engineering process, we don't want temperature to rise, so that heat losses should be minimum, or we need high quality heat.
Can you tell me in latent, when you are talking about latent heat, so suppose you have ice, right, and it is getting melted into water, liquid water, right? In this situation, whatever heat is you are supplying, which parameter is increasing very rapidly in this situation? So suppose you know temperature is constant, right?
Yeah, yes, sir. Volume.
So what is the parameter that is increasing? Volume, yes. Then what is the parameter that is increasing most?
The kinetic energy of the particles of water, basically. They increase and the vibrations increase, so it becomes like it transitions from solid to liquid.
Very good, but that is not the most. Yes, very good. Yeah.
Entropy of
so yes, that actually yes. Yes. Clear? So you are basically getting an ice which is an ordered state to a completely disordered state, right?
Yes, sir.
Now I go back to the previous question somebody asked, that spontaneity and efficiency. Now say suppose I am getting highly ordered to disordered state, I am supplying heat and I am generating a lot of entropy. Now question is that whether this process is efficient or not, right? Whereas in sensible heat, what am I doing? I am just increasing step by step. I'm pumping in heat, and then it is progressively going from a very say suppose here it is a little bit disordered to more disordered state. Here it is a little bit ordered to a little bit of disordered state, right? Yes. Now you may realize that the entropy change here will be small, entropy change here will be huge, and then again here the entropy change will be smaller. So you may see that from the efficiency perspective, you may like to be here, whereas from the feasibility perspective, spontaneity perspective, you may like to be here.
Yes.
Right? So yes, your answer is correct. Latent heat is why, because you can really without changing the temperature much, you can really deal with lot of energy. You can really encash that lot of energy at a constant temperature. But at the end of the day, this will also be a very spontaneous process. Moment you supply the energy, it is going to happen. And it is difficult to what? It is difficult to have the reversal of the trend. Right? You will need to do more work in order to do the reversal of the trend. In this situation, the reversal of the trend will be much easier. Yes, like say suppose boiler, like say suppose evaporator, like say suppose cooling tower, everywhere you will see, in all the heat exchangers, you will see that latent heat has been used very, very comprehensively to carry out heat transfer. While as sensible heat, I have very little amount of heat exchange that will be available through sensible heat. Now I cannot really make a big change in terms of the quantity, the calories. If you really think about, if you really calculate, say suppose how many calories increase in 1 degree centigrade temperature or 10 degree, and then during the phase change you will get a number. We will have those problems. You will see in the tutorials that how exactly sensible heat, it gives you much less heat exchange between the system and the surrounding, whereas latent heat gives you a very significant heat exchange between the system and the surrounding, and that's the reason why that is more used in the engineering processes. Right? Now, when we talked about degrees of freedom, So you need to know Gibbs phase rule. It will come automatically in your thermodynamics class. I just tell you that, what is this F? F is nothing but these degrees of freedom. How do I define how many parameters that I need? So it is like number of components minus number of phases plus 2. Okay, the derivation you will do in the thermodynamic class. So F equal to C minus P plus 2. What is a component? Say suppose I say liquid water. Let us look at this law and I say that, say suppose liquid water. So then what will be F? How many components in liquid water? Anybody? How many components are there in liquid water?
So one.
One component, right? How many phases?
One phase.
One phase. So C is 1, P is 1. So 1 minus 1 cancels. So F means 2. That means you only require 2 variables to define any thermodynamic parameter. So I'm just giving the example for a homogeneous substance, say water, it is F equal to 2. So if you really want to calculate the internal energy, U can be a function of T and V. It can be a function of P and V also. It can be a function of V and P also. Last class somebody asked the question that why we always take temperature and pressure. I mean, that has after doing so many years of thermodynamics, we know that if we go into that domain, we'll have certain descent advantage. If I calculate U with T and V, I will have certain descent advantage. If I calculate H with T and P, I will have certain descent advantage. That after knowing all these things. But as far as the usage, you may choose from this particular from this particular variables, any two you can choose from here. Any two you can choose from here. In these two spaces, you can choose any two in order to make sure that this is defined like this. So what is the degree of freedom here? It is 2. That means you need 2 thermodynamic variables. If you know temperature, what do you mean by if you need to know 2 thermodynamic variables? That means if you know temperature, if you know volume, you know the internal energy of the process. That is the meaning of the degrees of freedom. If you know the 2 variables, out of T, V, P, if you know 2 of them, you know the internal energy. Okay, that you will see. Say suppose if you know T and V, you will come to know P by the gas laws. And then what is U? U equal to CVdT. And then from there, moment you know the gas law, you know the CV, and from there you get CVdT, right? So this is the way you can really calculate the internal energy. Now I give you another. Say suppose liquid, vapor. Say suppose water is evaporating, and then there is vapor, there is water. So what will be my phase rule? How many components? Water is getting evaporated into liquid, right? 1. How many phases?
2.
2. Why? Because there is a gaseous phase, vapor phase, and then there is a liquid phase, right? So 1 minus 2, and then plus 2. So how many degrees of freedom? 1. Right? So when water is evaporating, if you have a liquid vapor water system, how many variables you need to know? 1. That's the reason you only define temperature. Or you only define pressure. Moment you define pressure, you know what will be the temperature and volume at this stage. Melting or maybe vaporization, right? Whenever there is a phase change that is taking place, it will be like that. Say suppose I have salt water. I have mixed salt with it, sodium chloride with it. So then how many components do I have?
2.
2. If you consider NaCl, if you consider NaCl to be a single component, then you have NaCl and water, right? If you consider Na plus and Cl minus to be 2 components, and then water, then you will have 3 components. It is about interpretation now. So let us say that Na plus, sodium chloride is always in an ionized state in water. So there is Na plus, there is Cl minus, and then there is water, right? How many components I have?
3.
3. How many phases do I have?
1.
2.
1. Because sodium chloride is soluble in water, no? When you say two
Yes,
phase, when you have a phase boundary, right? So sodium chloride is solvated in water, so there is no phase boundary here. So you have only one phase there, right? So how many 3 minus 1 plus 2? That means how many degrees of freedom I have here?
4.
4. So you may like to see that. Then how will I figure out? I will say that PT N1 N2. If I take these 4, then I will be able to. I need to know now 4 thermodynamic parameters in order to calculate any of U, H, any of these U, H, S, G, and all. Any one of them, if I need to calculate, I need. So, okay, this pointer is there. Sorry. So I just need to have any 4 of these parameters. Essentially, for enthalpy, you choose PT, N1, and N2. These are the degrees of freedoms. If I really want to define H for a system where I have got, sodium chloride in water, right? Now, say suppose I have a oil water. I have put mustard oil on top of water. Or say suppose I have put coconut oil on top of that water, right? Then how many components do I have here?
2.
2 components. How many phases do I have?
2.
And then plus 2, so I may need 2, right? So you can see this phase rule tells you what are the number of variables that you really need to define the thermodynamic parameters, like say suppose U, say suppose H, suppose A, suppose G, and all these things. Is it clear to all of you? Any question here? Great. You can see that this slide is a little bit simple for you. Energy, total energy is having 2 forms. One is microscopic, the other is macroscopic. In the microscopic, we have internal energy, where we also have kinetic and potential energy, but this is the average form of energy, right? Whereas in the macroscopic, say suppose I have a ball, right? You can think about inside the ball, a lot of activity that is going on. But until or unless I put it to the elevation, then I am not getting a potential energy, and if I'm not dropping, I'm not getting the kinetic energy there. So that is the macroscopic form. The movement of the car is a macroscopic form. But if I really look at the glass window, there are molecules of the glass window. Then what I may imagine that there is a lot of vibration, rotation of molecules that are taking place inside that glass window, which is to be interpreted as the internal energy. Whereas the car moving is a kinetic energy. The car getting gasoline and then worked up, that is a kind of potential energy, right? So kinetic and potential energy, these are all macroscopic form. In the microscopic form also there are kinetic and potential energy, but that we summarize into total form of the internal energy. And this form of energy, when I really start with this form of energy and try to perform a work, okay, I generate heat, which goes back where? Which goes back to this internal energy. Okay, so this is the matrix of work, heat, and energy. So I need energy in order to do the engineering processes. But moment I need this sort of energy, this is my workable energy. And this workable energy, moment I extract work in order to have engineering processes, I generate heat, which contributes, a part of it contributes here and a part of it contributes here. Whatever contributes here, I try to recycle. Whatever contributes here, it is in the form of loss. And that I have to minimize as an engineer, and that is the reason why I'm studying this engineering subjects. All right, so now you see, you may now see that nuclear, chemical, magnetic, electrical, potential, kinetic, mechanical, so different forms of energies are there, right? Which we call the total energy of the system, overall total energy of the system, where there is a kind of pyramid in terms of their quality, and that quality is always the sum of the constitutes the total energy, sum of the all microscopic forms constitutes the internal energy. Great. So we now can appreciate that there is a system, there is a surrounding, there is a boundary. This we have already discussed. We know what is a closed system. We know what is an open system. We know what is an isolated system. We have talked about these are the typical microscopic forms of energy, which is a part of internal energy. Now, internal energy is true for a closed system. Moment I get into the domain of open system, I know that there will be flow, there will be other aspects, there will be there'll be like electrical energy, there'll be use of magnetic fields, there'll be use of other different forms of energy. So then the parameter that I should be looking for an open system will be enthalpy. Great. Now once we understand, once we have this sort of background, then you really worry about the different types of engineering processes, right? And say, suppose if somebody tells you, say, okay, sir, you have told me that heat is going to, moment I try to do work, there will be heat that will be generated, and that heat will be like, say, suppose there is you're doing an engineering process in the system. Some heat will be generated, some heat will be transmitted through this boundary, and some that will affect the surrounding. Now, question is that what are the different modes of heat transfer? When this transfer process takes place from system to surrounding or system to different other systems, what are the different modes, right? So essentially, you divide this into three parts. One is called conduction, the other is called the convection, and the third is called the radiation, right? This division doesn't mean that, they are separate. The division means that they are not exclusive. The division means that they are more inclusive. Say, suppose I take an example of, say, kind of campfire you have, right? So you can see the air, that wind that is blowing around, which is transmitting this heat to your hand, that is more of a convection. So suppose if you have a steel rod which is inserted into this heat source, that is called conduction. And even if there is no fluid flow, nothing, even if there is no gradient, right? The heat that you feel, that is called the radiation. Can I ask you a question? Say, suppose every morning you see sun is up, and then you start receiving heat from sun, right? Can anybody tell me what is the mechanism of this heat transfer from sun to earth?
Radiation, sir.
Radiation. Can anybody describe how does it work here? How exactly it starts from the solar surface and arrives you? Any idea?
As a wave.
Yes, but how does the wave hits you? I mean, what type of wave is this? That it carries. Say suppose a wave is coming, right, and hitting you. Why you say, suppose if it touches you, why the surface is getting heated up? First of all, how is it transmitting in the middle?
The wave contains energy.
Electromagnetic radiation.
Yes. What is that? What is that? What is that? What is an electromagnetic radiation?
Energy traveling through electricity and electric charges and magnetic, maybe photons, that we say.
See, either photon or electron or proton, whatever, right? What is that? Can you define clearly?
They are energy packets.
What is that? How does it happen? I mean, what do you mean by energy packet? And most importantly, how do they arrive you? Is it a particle or a wave? Yes, I'm waiting for the answer. Why there is deafening silence?
So can we say that for this case it's a particle wherein which when hits our if we are talking the case of heat, whenever that photon particle, like if we consider it as a particle, it touches our skin, like whenever it hits our skin, the energy that the particle actually contains is actually transferred to as kinetic energy. That energy is transferred into our skin molecules. So our molecules are actually like the molecules in the skin are actually getting get a bit more energetic. So this energy is what we feel as like the sensation of heat. Can we say something like that?
It's a good attempt. I mean, I must congratulate you to making a very, very good attempt to answer the question. It's a difficult, first place, it is a difficult question, right? You have made a very good attempt to answer the question. Most importantly, while answering the question, you have kept the particle perspective in mind. That's okay. But but you also have to worry about the wave part also there, right? Why do you ignore that?
So we can say wave has some momentum, and that it carries the momentum, and when it's transferred to particle, it can knock off electrons, and that can create heat. Like energy can be either due to mass and speed. Energy can be either due to mass and speed, or it can be due to momentum.
Yes.
So we can say in case of photon, it would have some momentum that would carry its energy.
Yes. See, first place, it is very, very important to ask this question. You know, a lot of mysteries. Why am I telling this to a second year BTech course? Because I truly believe, you know, after going through all literature for last 130 years, this matter is still not fixed. And there are a lot of breakthroughs that are about to happen in this particular aspect. I'm absolutely sure, like you have right now, the confusion. You know, there are huge confusions in the entire scientific community, how exactly it happens. Let me try to simplify the problem for you. Now, say suppose you are talking about two particles, right? One is a photon, the other is the electron. Can anybody tell me that what is the wave particle nature of a photon and what is the wave particle nature of an electron? Can anybody tell me that whether photon is a particle or a wave, or whether the electron is a particle or a wave?
Sir, actually, if we it actually depends on the point of view. If we are actually at a subatomic level,
let me give you a clue. Let me give you a clue. The velocity of the particle decides whether it's a particle or a wave. Okay. So do you have any idea what is the velocity of photon and what is the velocity of electron? I mean, I need not have a number, but you can tell what is the percentage. Yeah, somebody.
Sir, in like in 12th or like +2 level, it was taught that like if we have actually look at a bigger picture,
No.
we can see
never refer to what was taught to you. Please take responsibility of all your statement. It is not the error of the teacher, right? You
Sure.
Make your own statement. You make your own. You take responsibility. And otherwise, always it is like, if my answer is wrong, then the problem is with the teacher. I am a mediator here. That should not be the case. You tell me your story.
Yeah, agreed, sir. Sir, shouldn't it be like at a subatomic level, we are looking it as a particle, but if we look at a bigger picture, like at our scale, like with our naked eye, for us it is a wave. Like, can this also be?
No, these things are very definite. These things are very well understood. This particular question, why am I asking? Because this is very well understood. And let me give you the answer. So 3 into 10 to the power 10 or 10 to the power 8 meter per second is velocity of photon, right? That is fixed. There is the velocity of the electromagnetic wave, right? Now, if you look at the velocity of electron, it is essentially 10% of that. Okay? And that's the reason why you are calling electron as you just weak it, you will get it immediately. And that's the reason why you are calling electron as a particle with a mass, where you have more particle nature, less wave nature, because it is only 10% of that, the velocity E equal to mc square, that c, which is an universal constant. You have the 10% of that velocity for the electron, whereas it is about 98% for a photon. So essentially, when you are looking for an electron, you have more particle material nature into it, whereas towards photon, it is more of an electromagnetic wave. Am I clear?
Yes,
Sir, I want to ask one thing.
Yeah.
Here you considered grade parameter as a C as a grade parameter for deciding particle and that wave nature. So I want to ask, is it because of that Maxwell's breakthrough through mathematical equation he proved that speed of wave is C through mathematics? Is that the reason? Means why?
C has been proven to be, it has nothing, nobody to blame. Maxwell, Boltzmann, I'm not blaming anybody. C is the maximum speed that you can obtain for it. I mean, moment it is C, that means it is fully energy. This is where you are starting, right? The relativity starts there. Moment you have achieved the velocity of C, there is no mass. Can anybody tell me what is the mass of an electron?
9.18.
There is a number, right? What is the mass of a photon? You will see gradually as you look at.
Is assumed to be massless.
10 to the minus, no, 10 to the minus 41. It has been measured. Okay. So every energy, see, it is about like, you are dealing with an energy form and see, why do you say that mass and energy are in together? Totally it is conserved. Why don't you say that mass is conserved and energy is conserved separately? Because if you take a material object which has a definite mass, say suppose the Earth, right? Now today, if I start accelerating Earth with the velocity of 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second, right? What do you expect here to happen?
Becomes mass.
The mass will get converted to energy, right? If you can energize the matter in that manner. Did you get my point? So this will become massless. The entire entity will become massless. And that's the reason why experiments are ongoing. So suppose if you are in, those are the time machine experiments. So suppose in India, you are right now flying to US with an aeroplane, right? So what I do, I convert you into a massless energy object in India. And then, once you arrive in a split second to US, what I do the reverse. I convert you again from energy to mass. These are the concepts of the time machines, right? So over a period of time, in a split second, say suppose somebody is traveling through Tokyo to US, and you are traveling, say suppose, I have dug a tunnel from, say suppose from IIT Guwahati to New York, right? So both of you start, but the person who is going through the minimum path will be traveling the fastest because it's an electromagnetic wave. Right? So you may see that this is one particular domain where you will have a lot of issues in terms of the understanding. The understandings are not yet established, and most importantly, most problematically, that you people are not asking those questions, which are very, very pertinent to this. To simplify the discussion a little bit from what we are discussing for last 5 minutes, every matter has two states. One is the energy state, which is the wave form, and the other is the mass state, which is the material form. And it is about proportion of these two. And that's the reason why you enforce the balance laws in terms of the total mass and energy to be constant for a given process inside system and surrounding, and then you add up both of them. Now, when you look at the surface of sun, there is huge nuclear reactions going on, and from there, you generate a photon, which is a very high speed object. And that's the reason you take about 8 minutes, 8.8 minutes, 18 seconds for the first photon that starts from the surface of the sun and arrive the Earth's surface, right? In the waveform, it's the highest form of energy, right? More is the velocity. That means, more is the quality of energy, and then it hits the surface. And as somebody said that when it hits the surface, it increases the internal energy of the surface. So the macroscopic energy is getting converted to the microscopic. This is what is happening here. That's what I was trying to tell you, that when there is an energy source here, right? So the photons, you can really also see different types of waves are coming, right? But the photons which are starting here and hitting the surface of your hand, there is an increase in the internal energy. And that increase in the internal energy is getting reflected to the increase in the Q. So, your hand is getting heated up when you put hand in front of a fire source. Can everybody visualize in this class this aspect? Is it clear to you, or you have a question?
So I have a question, but relating to the part before this. So when we say we can increase the speed, so it will convert into energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we decrease the speed, will a photon convert into mass?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. As you say, suppose that's the reason I have given you the electron, right?
Mm-hmm.
So electron is moving at a much lesser velocity. There are many massless particles in atoms, right? What does it mean? They are moving at the high speed, and you have the threshold speed of the maximum value of that invariant, right? The electromagnetic waves. Nothing can move more than that, right? Velocity, yes. There is a threshold limit to this increase in the velocity. There is a ceiling, upper ceiling, but if you are really moving at a much lower speed, I mean, you are operating at a much lower speed. First thing, what you have to understand that somebody was mentioning that energy packet. Can anybody tell me how exactly these energy packets are created?
So in a nuclear reaction, when there's fission or fusion, there is some change of mass between right hand side and left hand side. So right. That change of mass is energy.
No, I mean how exactly? Say suppose if you have a black body and that is generating that radiation, that is generating that wave. What is the mechanism behind it? The mechanism is the mechanism of an oscillator, right? It's very simple. The way I generate the waves, macroscopic waves. Say what I do, I take a pendulum, right? A simple pendulum. And what I do, I just start oscillating the pendulum like this, right? So what will happen, because if I am oscillating the pendulum, say if there is air just towards the immediate vicinity of that, what it will do, it will push the air. So there will be densification and then there will be rarefication when it will be pushing back, right? So the to and fro motion, what it does, it creates an oscillation in air, and that is the reason you generate the wave, the macroscopic wave in the air, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the way you create the black body radiation. So you need an oscillator there. That oscillates at a particular frequency, and that frequency is generating these energy packets at a particular interval, which is your h nu. This nu is the frequency of that oscillator. Right? And that's what is happening. You can expect in the solar surface. So it is just, now based on the oscillation, it decides that what will be your velocity, right? If the oscillation is at a much lower velocity, oscillation frequency is much smaller, then you have a smaller velocity, and if the frequency is larger, then you have a larger velocity, and that decides the wavelength, whether it's an ultraviolet, whether it's X-ray, whether it's infrared. It is decided by the oscillator oscillating at what speed, the wave is generated at what speed.
Yes.
Sir, photons are oscillators. It
is generated because of the black body radiation, right? It is generating. If you look at the paper that was written, it starts with Wien's equation, which is a kind of, the starting point. Black body radiation is the major origin of this E equal to h nu. H nu means what? It is the energy packet, right? I'll give you a very simple example. Say suppose you have hydrogen molecule, right? Now electron, say suppose it is in the highest occupied molecular orbital, right? It's called HOMO. Now you give some energy to the electron. What it does, it makes a jump towards the LUMO, lowest unoccupied molecular orbital, correct? So now this is quantified as h nu, it gets an energy h nu and goes up. And when it comes back, what it does, it really releases that h nu. Say, I just heat up the molecule, right? So if I give enough energy, what will happen? Electron will go up, and then moment it will come down, what it will do? It will release h nu. And if it keeps on doing like this, so suppose it is jumping from HOMO to LUMO and then coming back from LUMO to HOMO. If it keeps on doing like this, what will happen? You will keep radiating one h nu from there. This is what is a harmonic oscillator, which is leading to the black body radiation. And that wave you are capturing in the form of electromagnetic wave in the radiation. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I had another doubt. Sir, you had mentioned that like the more the velocity, the more the component of energy we can say. Like that's what because
more it's in a waveform. More in a
waveform.
So and more you expect in a particle form. That means it has a less velocity.
Okay, so is this applicable for everything? Like suppose I mean it won't really practically affect it, but suppose we are static, a person is static and someone is moving at a running at a higher pace. So is this some kind of like, are we saying that the person who is running at a higher
if you start running at the velocity of 3 to 10 to the power 8 meter per second, if you start running at that velocity, you can convert all your material form into energy.
Oh.
Why? Why? Because you know that now all subatomic particles that in your body, say suppose I look at my cells, all chromium, manganese, whatever ions I possess in my body, carbon, everywhere you are supplying the energy, which is equivalent to 3 to 10 to the power 8 meter per second, right?
Yes.
Everywhere that energy is available, right?
Right.
So you basically radiate the whole energy, right? You
so
get my point?
We become a wave only in a way, like energy
No,
kind of.
You are actually a wave. Say suppose if you look at yourself, you are looking at this material form because your senses are limiting you to the material form. But you do possess electron, which is moving at the velocity of 10% of light. In your body itself, it is moving, right?
Yes.
And how much space in a atom is occupied? You just look at that as an electron cloud, right? In an electron cloud, so suppose if you have an s orbital, in s orbital, how much space is occupied by the electron?
So like majority of the space is empty and only electrons are the ones. So we can say, yeah, a lot of
there's nothing.
Is actually
there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Nucleus is also, it's not occupying anything. If you look at an atom, I'm just looking at a very simple hydrogen atom. I'm even not going to even bigger molecules. But if I look at a carbon atom, which is mostly we are composed of, you tell me, you calculate what is the percentage of area, percentage of volume that has been captured in an atom by the subatomic particles. Would I put forward my point? So essentially, it is nothing but energy. It is interpretation. We are looking at it as a material form.
Okay, so basically, essentially, we also have a lot of waveform, but only thing is we are not, our senses are limited to the physical, that is the material
yes
form.
Yes, so this is very small. This is very small. I imagine that s orbital to be spherical, and I say that this is the space where the probability of finding this is highest. That doesn't mean that it has occupied everything. At a particular instant, it is occupying one spot of that. Entire other part is free.
Right. So
essentially, you don't have much things occupied in the form of material. This is our illusion, isn't it?
Right. I mean, if we look at such a level, then we actually think that we have a lot of empty spaces.
When you do X-ray of your body, what image do you get?
Though, like
it is only bones. It is only bones, right? Why? Because X-ray is through. X-ray has the wavelength to make your body transparent. Why is it going through? Where is it? Say if it is everywhere, it is occupied. These X-rays are going through what?
The empty spaces, basically.
These are the empty spaces. That's why it is transparent. You know, if you keep on increasing the energy, everything will be transparent. Even bone will be transparent. Correct?
Yeah. So that's
So there's
okay.
nothing.
Basically,
There's nothing.
got it. Yeah.
Correct. So now it is all about interpretation in that sense, that how exactly you visualize. So conduction is a mode where you go for the hardcore molecular vibrations. Convection is the mode where these systems they move, whereas radiation is the mode where you are dealing with these subjects. And I'm telling you, those who are investing time in radiation in your future, next 10 years career, this is a very, very important area, because a lot of breakthroughs are going to happen next 20 years. So keep an eye on this subject, right? Okay. So, we'll focus on these three modes and their equations in the next class. So I stop today here and we'll continue in the next class. Any other question that you have with this? No? Okay then. So see you in Friday. Take care. Bye-bye for today.